Hey, it's Micah. Oftentimes, when we talk about how to exit your business, there are a bunch of different things that come up and a bunch of different channels that you can use to do so or to grow your business. Today, I have a fantastic conversation with a person that you'll never forget. But before we get into it, I'm Micah Logan. You're watching or listening to The Common Sense Show. All right, welcome to the Common Sense Show, and I am back. I am here with my main man, Ryan Goral, and Ryan is the founder of G Spire Group, and it's a company that focuses on helping entrepreneurs, executive, and small business owners acquire companies. They provide fractional corporate development executive services to companies who are growing through mergers and acquisitions, adding leadership capacity to your team. They support mergers and acquisition efforts by providing execution oriented support encompassing strategic planning through integration efforts. Ryan has 15 years of experience focused on working with small businesses. In addition to providing creative financial solutions, Ryan's expertise is centered around adding value to entrepreneurs and executives with all aspects of executing their growth, organization's growth, and mergers and acquisition strategies. So that's a lot of words, and people watching this may want to know in just one sentence, what in the world do you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Micah. So the main function we provide is adding leadership and management capacity to, management teams. So we help companies grow through acquisitions. Oftentimes, the businesses we're working with, their leadership and management teams are tapped out in terms of capacity. They're busy managing and running their businesses. They don't have the time to truly dedicate the time and effort and discipline that's needed to go grow through an acquisition. So
Yep.
we plug in as a fractional executive as part of their teams to specifically drive this growth channel for them.
Awesome. So well said. So this has been one of, well, if you're an entrepreneur, I think worth their salt. One of your goals, hopefully, is acquisition as a way to exit your business. Whether it's acquisition on a wholesale level where you get someone to have a super majority stake in your company, would put you in the majority and you go off to Tahiti somewhere, and of course they're running it for you until they to buy out your remaining shares, or they just take a majority stake in your business, leaving you with some, but you still have operational duties and responsibilities to the company on a daily basis. It depends on how the acquisition shakes up, I'm sure. But my life work has to be to get has been to get all my companies acquired because that's just frankly one of my goals. So, um, one of the things I like about what you do is you all focus on doing this in the small business realm. What made you choose small business growth through acquisitions, sales through acquisitions, as opposed to going after medium-sized companies?
Yeah, so the small lower middle market space, which everyone has a definition that's different. Uh, I define as doing anywhere from revenue from 5 to 30, 40 million in annual revenue. So those are the size companies. And what I noticed in my experience is these size of companies lack professional advisors
Mhm.
focused on helping them. A lot of the professional services that are out there are really tailored for those middle market and bigger companies. And I just saw that, that $10 million revenue business, that owner who's an owner operator running a really nice business just didn't have the time and
Mm.
capacity to go do this work. And even if they had the time, they really wouldn't know what to do because they've never done a sizable M&A transaction before.
Mhm.
So when I looked at the market, I saw that. I saw the need.
Yep.
Secondly, the other reason I'm focused on it is because the amount of value that can be created at the smaller company level is immense. So let
Mhm.
me use an example. So let's say you're doing a half a million in cash flow a year
Mhm.
as a smaller business. You might be worth, call it 3 times cash flow. You might be worth 1.5 million bucks if you were to go sell. But if you were to grow that, whether organically or inorganically, to say 1 or 2 million in cash flow, that multiple expands. It goes from 3 to 4, 5, or maybe even 6, depending on the business.
Right.
So if you take that smaller $500,000 or $1 million cash flow business and you can go do an acquisition or two to grow their cash flow, the amount of value that's created just from the sheer size, not to mention all of the things that we do to help our clients professionalize their business, build and lead and inspire new management and leadership, removing key man risk, all of the things that actually are adding value to the business too. When you look at sheer numbers,
Mhm.
at 500,000, the delta between growing from 500,000 to 1.5 million or $2 million in cash flow through an acquisition can create a lot of value, enterprise value for that business owner. So that was another reason why I wanted to focus on this space is that dynamic.
And so, in some respects, given controlling for certain factors, are you saying that it's better to add that bottom line revenue to get that multiple by targeting perhaps a competitor or a business that is a strategic buy to give you more market strength as a small business, um, than it is to just try to grow it through client or customer revenue? Are you saying that it accelerates that process? Is that what you found in this journey?
Yeah, it makes it faster. So acquisitions can get you to where you're trying to go faster for sure. But to your point, a very valid point there is it also allows you to, instead of hiring a couple sales folks to grow organically, which you should be doing,
Mhm.
it also allows you to maybe even go expand your product and service offering. So um, let's say you offer a product and service, and that's your lane, but your customers are constantly asking you, "Hey, do you do X?" And you're like, "No," but go talk to XYZ company because they do it.
Right.
If you get that question enough, well, you can go make an acquisition to provide that product and service, and really diversify the products and services you're bringing to your clients, which not only is helping your cash flow, but it's also enhancing the value of the business because you're diversifying your revenue base and your customer base and the products and services you're offering, which in combination with additional cash flow, a buyer coming in to acquire that business will look at it as less risky. It'll provide more value to the business, the enterprise value to the business because of that aspect.
Mhm.
I always say organic growth, should have a place,
Right.
but there's some businesses that could also benefit from taking this other growth or doing this other growth strategy in parallel with the organic growth.
So let's talk about the business owner for a moment because we know that leadership is the problem and leadership is the solution. So, what do you think? What have you observed about when a small business owner or medium sized business owner should recognize that they need extra help in trying to figure out whether acquisitions is the right way to go so that they can get that multiple that they want? Because if you're listening to this podcast or you're watching this on YouTube, it's all about the multiple. And that's why we're here. And that's why you're doing what you do, because the multiple matters. And the multiple is the difference between being all set and kind of comfortable in retired life if you don't become an investor, and being really all set and not having to worry about absolutely anything when you're retired. So When is a good time for a business owner to actually recognize the need or recognize that there's a hole on their team that can do what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that question is constantly and always. There should be an awareness, a self-reflection aspect in leadership that's constantly revisiting your business. How's it performing? Where is its position in the market? Is there any areas where they're losing market share or losing deals to their competition? That should be an ongoing, active thing from leadership teams. But a couple, I guess, times where these things get intensified is when you start noticing you're losing a lot of deals to competitors.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you have some employee attrition. You can't keep employees very long. You get to a place where your revenue plateaus.
Yeah.
Those are a couple places where like something is a little bit off here that I need to shore up. And those are typically the types of things that, when self-aware, a business owner may go, man, is there another way to tackle this challenge? And maybe acquisitions is something that I should explore. But I think that the industries today they're so dynamic. They're
Mm.
constantly changing. There's constantly new entrants. There's constantly technology adoption that is dynamically changing businesses. So it's even more important, in my opinion, to constantly revisiting where is the future demand from the customer? Where is the puck going? Because if we're not planning and putting together a strategy and executing on that strategy to continue to stay relevant, I think it's dangerous. It's increasing risk to the enterprise.
Mhm.
I live by the you're either growing or dying mentality.
Yep.
There's no staying the same. It's something, I was an athlete growing up. It's something my coaches constantly said. There is no staying the same. If you're
Right.
staying the same, you're slowly going the wrong direction. So,
Yes, let's talk about that because this is a really important thing. And oftentimes, what happens is what in a lot of interviews, not with you, but in general, people don't drill down, and there's not actually good, useful information that comes out. So I like to kind of drill down a little bit. So you talked about learning where the puck is going. Nice Wayne Gretzky reference that you have there. And how does a leader or a business owner in a specific industry, doesn't matter which one, figure that out? Where would you suggest that they look? How do they analyze where the whole future of their industry is going? Because and I'll add another question to that, or attach a statement to that, which is um, oftentimes business owners don't take a global industry look because their business is their world, and if it's outside of that ecology, then it doesn't exist to them. But how can they adopt a global mindset, and where should they go to get that information?
it's a great question. A couple thought streams here, so bear with me. So the
Mhm.
first answer would be finding a way to get out of the weeds of the business so they can spend time on the strategic working on the business. That is where that's the type of activity that leads to understanding where the puck's going.
Mhm.
Really, really hard to do when you're constantly putting out fires day to day. So that's
Right.
kind of stream number one.
Mhm.
Stream number two is, okay, now you've got the time, whether you're doing it as an owner, you're bringing in a consultant or somebody to help you with this work, whatever the case may be. Now you've got the time and you've got the resources you're dedicating toward it. Um, the next two-prong thing that comes to my mind in terms of understanding where the puck goes is doing primary research, which is directly talking to your customers, your suppliers, your employees, and getting feedback
Mhm.
on why did they choose the competitor? Why are prices going a certain direction? Why are employees leaving? And what are the comp packages that they're leaving for? It's understanding on the ground what's happening in real time with your business. And then it's being able to take that data and maybe some further questions to your customers and saying, where are your needs going?
Mhm.
You're going over to competitor A over here for pricing, but what are they providing you? And making sense of the what's actually happening in the business. And then it's constantly being in front of them, because I think eventually, if you have the time and resources and you're thinking strategically where the puck is going, you are starting to pair what's actually happening on the ground with what's happening in the industry.
Mhm.
What is happening that is causing your customers to need certain products or services, and how
Right.
is that evolving, is not something that, if you're spending 90 hours in your business putting out fires, is something that's easy to do. So that's where I would say, how do you go find where that puck's going? It's a lot of conversations with your customers and your stakeholders.
It is interesting. I talk about it all the time. It's a principle of the E Myth. Michael Gerber obviously beats that drum in that book. He's not the only one, but he's kind of the pioneer of getting out of your business and running your pie shop from 30,000 square foot. And one of the things that I notice in a lot of industries are that people, for instance, let's take an industry, let's say manufacturing, they don't go outside their industry to see what some of the similarities exist in the marketplace that they can actually take into their business and actually use. So, for instance, recurring revenue is the theme of the day. It's what investors are looking for right now. Businesses that are recurring revenue opportunities that have low overhead, low risk, recurring revenue opportunities. The health and fitness industry is not the only industry that offers a recurring revenue model. There are a bunch of them. And so, one of the things that I've advised business owners myself are to look at industries, for instance, that have a recurring revenue model and take the good, leave the bad, and see what you can bring over into your business. As you said, doing some predictive analysis about where the future of your business is going and what the choices that the stakeholders are making in the business are and why they're making those choices, but then adding to that some of the elements that actually make things like revenue increase, bottom line revenue increase, and mixing that with your predictive analysis is a big factor in developing a strategy that does not exist in your industry yet. And it's okay if the industry is established to set the precedent in your business through how you work with unique ideas from other industries. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm a big fan and advocate for, I call it kind of cross-functional learning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think a lot of these peer groups that have been developed um, are really valuable. So you take CEOs that are in 5 or 10 different industries,
Mm-hmm.
and you get them talking about their business in a very discreet way, of course, but
Right.
there's the nuances in their business models that are in industry A could be a innovation in industry B.
Mm-hmm.
And something is, these are typically simple things, contracts. You mentioned recurring revenue. Is there a way to productize your product or your service in a way that creates a reoccurring stream?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. Not all businesses can do that, but it's learning from other businesses that are in different industries, because what you end up seeing is, this is how the industry has constantly always done it. This is how we have to do it because all of our competition is doing it similarly. You kind of get into that battle rhythm where you learn about another business sector or industry, and they're doing something completely different. And with an open mind, maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
something that can be an innovation to your business that separates you from your competition. So I really like that cross-functional learning topic.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, okay, so you're approaching the thought that, or you recognize as a business leader that you need to grow your bottom line revenue to increase your multiple. So we talked about that. Now, here you are on the, and you've thought about the fact that you need to bring in someone like yourself to consult on this. What are some of, from what you've seen, like the top three things, and if there are more, if there are fewer, that companies are missing that they could implement tomorrow, for instance, to help them get themselves structured correctly to be in a position to acquire another business. So eliminating the obvious one, which is capital, because we'll talk about that in a minute. There are other things that they're going to need to absorb another business, and what are some of those things?
Yeah, capital's, being capital ready is,
Mm-hmm.
we'll put that on aside, but having the guardrails around what's available capital wise is an important prep.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but outside of that, a lot of the stuff that I work on, some of the big misses or some of the places where owners can really help themselves get ready is having a very, very clear vision and a supporting kind of why. It sounds simple, and everyone, I know it's talked about a lot, and I'm sure there's people like, oh yeah, 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 why? But there is something pure about having, here's where I'm trying to go and why I'm trying to do it.
Okay.
It's in the work of M&A, it's amplified.
Mm.
If you're looking to go make an acquisition for the wrong reasons,
Yep.
likely going to not be it's going to be a disastrous move.
Right.
So, if you're letting ego and pride, and I want to go acquire something because one of my friends did it and sounds like a cool thing to do, wrong why. So, some of the work that I do up front is just making sure that the vision is clear, which sometimes takes a little work,
Yep.
which I like to do,
Mm-hmm.
um, because the vision needs to be informing the M&A strategy, not the other way around. So
Right.
it's, here's where we're going, and does M&A make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yes. If it does, then we can develop a very specific plan for the M&A strategy. But the first step is, where am I trying to go? How big of a company am I trying to build? Why am I trying to build this type of company? And just going through that thought process can be very helpful as you move through the process and being ready. And then the other thing that comes to mind, which I think is probably more applicable to your question, is, you know, it's like one of those things that I constantly see and try to advise around, which is, make sure your house is in order before we go buy another company. It's hard enough to go transact and then merge two companies together. If your financials are a mess, or your operations are, not documented, and your HR, you have you got pretty bad attrition, employees constantly leaving, and turnover problems. A lot of that stuff and noise, if it's not, at least, there's no perfect company, but
Right.
you at least have to have a handle on it, because it's just going to get infinitely worse when you take another business who has similar problems and you're combining them. So to the extent that you can, having good financial reporting, being on top of your numbers, good dashboards and metrics and key performance indicators, all of those things kind of steadily ready. And then you've got your processes and your procedures and your sales processes, all of that stuff running at some sort of regular cadence.
Mm-hmm.
I think would, again, nothing's perfect, but if you can get those things feeling pretty good and stable, then I'd say, okay, you're doing, that would be the next step on getting your company ready for this type of work.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I just started franchising my local concept in about last year, and you can't even expect. You talk about mergers and acquisitions. Essentially, franchising is growth through a person acquiring your brand on some level. You're not involved, for instance, in directly involved in merging your business with them, but and we can I can probably stretch my analogy to to accommodate that there's unique involvement that are similar to merging your company with another one. You merge brands, all the other stuff. So, but the bottom line is, before you can even do that, you have to have an operations manual. It's part of one of the three things you have to do in order to franchise, and you have to be able to take that and basically turn it over to someone and say, "Here, run the play," and here it is. And in order for them to be successful, they have to have the answers to the test, which are, what do I do? when this problem comes up? What kind of staff do I need to address that problem? How much staff do I need? How often should they work? Where should they work? How do I schedule them to work in such a way that it actually grows revenue? How do they market? What should they be doing? All these unique little things that go into the whole construct of running a business are so important to operationalize. And I can't imagine how many companies you've spoken to who have maybe elicited your service where you're just like, dude, you have to put together an operating manual, which is going to take you like 6 to 8 months before we can even we can even start talking. Is that something that you help with, or is that something that you expect? Because we could call it low hanging fruit, but that's a big task.
It's a major initiative. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a little nuanced because my sales cycle for developing an M&A and executing an M&A strategy can make it happen as fast as 3 to 6 months, I guess, but it's not usually likely. My
Right.
sales to go build the relationships and go find a target and do due diligence and close and integrate is it's a 12 to 18 month all in process. So it doesn't mean I can't start my work because for let's use this example, the operating manual isn't done, but as I go execute, I am recommending they dial in their operations through building an operating manual. And I wouldn't do that for them. I would bring in resources or referrals that could support them in doing that if they were needed, or there's someone on their internal team that can do it. But it's super important because think about taking a company who doesn't have a standard process of anything. You acquire a company, you put capital and debt, so a lot of things at risk. And when you're integrating that company, the new employees are saying, well, how do you guys do this? I don't know. We all do it differently. That just doesn't, you lose credibility right off the bat because now the employees are like, these guys don't know what they're doing.
Mhm.
There's no standard processes for anything. How are we supposed to learn how to do it your way since we have to be absorbed into you? It's just there's so many things that are negative, that it's a negative impact for not having that house in order. And I think it's super important to your point. Something as simple as an operating manual that's broken down by a couple of the major muscle movements and functions of your business can go a long way.
I've heard stories about valuations of companies that added multiples just by having operations manual that they didn't have in place prior to them attempting to be valuated or even sold. And it added like, a multiple of three, a factor of three onto whatever they were going to what the initial offer was. So they stopped, went back, took another year to try to get that together, and then ended up increasing their value and their multiple by three. Um, so let's talk about deal structuring. And because that is obviously that's really the whole point. Like you want to have a good deal when you go into this. What are some of the most important terms that businesses should look for in these M&A agreements when they're other than having an M&A attorney that specializes in that? Don't just get your family attorney Bob to go and do it. What are some key terms provisions that they should include?
Yeah, I mean, having a good M&A focused attorney, transactional attorney is invaluable. Someone
Mhm.
that's done this transaction before is highly recommended. Um, Deal structure. If I was going to say one thing that needs to be understood and addressed when putting together a deal structure is understanding the risk of the transaction.
Mhm.
That's first, because if you don't understand the risk of the transaction, you can't mitigate that risk. And I use deal structuring as a way to minimize or mitigate or deal with certain risk profiles of the transaction. So I would say understanding the risk profile of the target company is number one. Number two, I would say, um, there's a lot that goes into that question, but I would say that the other mistake I see folks doing is deploying too much leverage into the transaction
Mhm.
via debt. And, um, every situation is different. If you have the cash and you've got some reserves and you've got some cushion, and it's one of my principles, room for error. You got to have room
Mhm.
for error in these transactions. And a lot of times I'm looking at cash balances post-transaction as that room for error cushion. So if you're a company that, let's say you're going to go buy $1 million $1 million business,
Mhm.
and you're able to get 80% leverage, and that's 200 grand of cash coming to the table, and
Mhm.
you're sitting on $210,000 of cash, not enough room for error. You're
Yeah.
going to use all of your cash to transact. So understanding the size of the transaction, the equity that you have, the post-transaction liquidity that's going to be required to lower the risk profile of the transaction and make sure you're not, oh crap, day 30, you've run out of money and now you don't know what to do and the whole thing can fall apart. That's part of the risk profile. And then the last piece of that, these are all intertwined: risk, cash, post-transaction liquidity, and not over leveraging. Is you got to understand, um, what dictates what over leverage is the liquidity, but on the other side of it is the cash flow of the combined companies.
Mhm.
So you need to understand what things, they call them synergies in the M&A market. But when you combine companies, what things are redundant that you can
Yep.
remove from the operations, and what is the cash flow stream going to look like going forward? That will dictate how much debt service that cash flow can support. And obviously, the more synergies, the more cash flow that can drop to the bottom line, which would suggest potentially more leverage able to put on the transaction.
Mhm.
So those are, from a deal structuring perspective, those are the major muscle movements. And the last one I'd be remiss not to mention, what the risk profile is, especially in this environment right now, when we have decent amount of uncertainty in the market right now,
Right.
is spreading out the risk. Meaning, if you're going to buy that $1 million company,
Mhm.
you can get 80% leverage, and maybe let's say you have 200,000 of cash and you get 200 of reserves, so you feel comfortable with that $200,000 equity check. Well, maybe what we should do is ratchet down the leverage to 60% and have the seller carry 20, and make sure that he or she is going to be engaged in a peaceful transition and
Mhm.
engaged in making sure that the business is represented the way it should be through due diligence.
Mhm.
Spread the risk to the seller to a certain extent, just to make sure there's some additional guardrails on it as you kind of figure out what the next couple of years look like, because none of us have a crystal ball. So spreading out that risk profile as part of the deal structure would be that last kind of point on that question, I think.
So I have questions. So, because you mentioned some things which I think are important, but you have to execute this with the razor's edge, because also, in my opinion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong, some of these things could be potentially deal killers as well, on both sides of this transaction. And what I mean by that is, I want to first address: do you have a ratio that you go to for post acquisition equity, like liquidity? Is there a recommendation that you have?
Yeah, it depends on the business model.
Mhm.
Really, what's the fixed overhead is a big variable if that changes from business to business.
Yeah.
But as a rule of thumb, historically, I've always kind of used 10% of the leverage,
Hmm.
10 to 20% of the leverage number as post-transaction liquidity, just as a place to start. And then
Okay.
if you're buying a business and the combined business has a lot of overhead that doesn't provide a bunch of flexibility, that rule of thumb should be higher.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have a lot of overhead and some flexibility in its working capital and the financial cash flow of the business, well, then maybe you can get away with having a little less.
Right.
But I would say, that 10 to 20% historically is what I've looked at as post-transaction liquidity, just as a place to start.
Okay. That's
Um,
fair.
and then the other ratio that you kind of need to work with will be coming from the bank side of things, which
Mhm.
is, what are they going to require from a debt service? They call it debt service coverage ratio perspective, which is the ratio between cash flow and the annual debt cost on a monthly or annual basis. And every bank is different, but most of those ratios you're going to find they want to see that ratio after distributions at 1.25 or 1.3 or higher. Typically.
I'm going to stop you real quick, just in case we have someone who's kind of newer listening to this conversation and they're running a business that's actually generating money. And just to break down that point a little more, that banks are really keen on what your cash flow is, because that's how they're going to get paid back. So
That's right.
they simply want to know what your leftover cash is after this transaction to ensure that you can service the debt. And obviously you should know this too, because this should be also a part of your valuation, because acquiring a company, as you said, for ego can lead someone to having almost no liquidity. But the bank was theoretically, the bank should stop you, because they should already recognize that they're not going to finance something that has almost no liquidity post investment or acquisition. But go ahead. I just wanted to kind of step that back.
Yeah. So there's the liquidity question, definitely
Yep.
important one. The debt service ratio piece is more of a cash flow function.
Mm-hmm.
So it's revenue after cost of goods sold, after operating expenses. What's the EBITDA of the company?
Yep.
And what the bank's going to want to see is, let's say the annual debt service is $100,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to want to see that cash flow at 125 or higher,
Right.
to show that you can make those debt payments. Because to your point, the cash flow is what's repaying
Mm-hmm.
the bank.
Right.
They want to see liquidity there as a backstop for risk purposes, but they ultimately, if they're going to give you a 5, 7, or 10-year loan, they want to see that there's stable cash flow, that they're hypersensitive on the cash flow generation of that business.
And so, folks, if you're listening to this, it all boils down to, it's almost like a house. If you're in a real estate investor, then you make money when you buy the house. That's the general rule, because they can do the math. Essentially, functionally, it works the same way when you're buying a business. In theory, although there are infinitely more moving parts in a service or product-based business than there is in a real estate transaction. However, principally, these theories actually align, which is that if you're looking at the financials of the business that you're acquiring, then theoretically you should be able to anticipate, based off of what their EBITDA is, earnings before interest, taxes, all the other stuff. So you should be able to understand how much cash flow that they have, that you're adding to your cash flow that you're generating with your business. And if you add your cash flow to their cash flow, and the how much money it's going to cost you to finance this whole acquisition, that should all equal a surplus for you. And as Ryan's saying, you're growing your net number and then give you a bigger valuation. However, adding cash on top of cash is fine, but you have to be able to basically pay all the bills in your business, all the bills in the next business, and in addition to the bills in the next business that you're acquiring, you're also acquiring debt to acquire this company. So you have to be able to pay for that too, and there has to be money left over so that you can actually increase your valuation, because you could acquire a business and end up with the exact same valuation if you don't do it right, and you just have more risk because you have two companies and double the employees to deal with. I'm not sure if you've ever seen that come up, but I did have a question about the deal structuring term. There was one that I thought was interesting. How much risk are you able to pass on to the acquiree before it's a deal breaker historically? Like, what have you seen? What level of tolerance do they have to take back risk from the acquirer?
Well, I've seen it. I probably haven't seen it all, but I've seen a lot in my experience, and it's 100% different on every deal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's part of the negotiating of the deal. Um, you're dealing with human beings. There's a lot of emotion involved. It's real money, and a lot of times it's substantial money. So it's delicate.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, as a general rule, it's somewhat customary to have some level of seller carry as part of a transaction, or an earnout, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
There could be. a situation where a seller will say 0,
Mm,
and it's a deal breaker if you can't get there. Now, there's
right.
other ways to manage risk, and you have to work through that with your team and your advisors. But that reality is they may not budge,
Mhm,
and you have to find out a way to address that risk in another way. Um, then there's the other folks that, if they're being represented by a broker or a banker, they typically have been educated to assume some level of seller carry component to the transaction. Usually, these things are probably in that 10% range. I think is probably
mhm,
down the middle of the fairway for these
mhm,
transaction structures. Um, and to ask them to do more,
mhm,
yes, you can risk blowing up the deal. This is where having, experienced M&A lawyer or other people helping you comes very, very valuable,
right.
because your these advisors can help you and understand kind of what are all the options and how to message certain things.
Mhm,
So, if, let's say, in that transaction, it's, that letter of interest was put into the offer of the business, and you put in there a 10% seller carry.
mhm,
They accept it. Everyone's happy. We move into due diligence, and you find out that, there's a customer concentration that you weren't aware of, or that you didn't understand for whatever reason. There was, you know, 40%, 50% of their business is from one customer,
mhm.
which elevates the risk profile of the transaction.
Yeah.
So instead of saying, well, heck, I'm going to give this a 30% haircut, and, I don't want to pay for this type of business, another way you can address it. And maybe that was completely reasonable, and that might be the
Mhm.
right route. But let's say you have some level of comfort that that 50% concentration is okay.
Yep.
You may want to deal with that as a justification for asking for a revision of the seller carry from 10 to 20 or 10 to 30, and just and be able to message, well, this customer concentration is, I wasn't aware of that at stage LOI. um, I see it as a big risk. Please tell me how this isn't a big risk, and this is how I want to address it. And you use it as a way to negotiate that seller carry.
Right.
Could it blow it up? Yes, it could. And if it does, that deal risk profile changes, and maybe it's not the right one for you. And it's
Right.
okay for a deal not to consummate if it's outside the bounds of risk for your
Mhm,
business. But you always have to start with, where do I feel comfortable with this deal?
mhm.
You message and explain it the best you can. Sometimes it'll be accepted, sometimes it won't. That's just the nature of growing through this, growing through M&A.
All you DIY people listening to this podcast right now, it is best to always have a third party intermediary in between these transactions, because when you have spent your life like operating a business, and our perceived value of what we bring to the table sometimes is it's emotional, like you said, on both sides of this transaction. And sometimes when you have two people who have spent their lives building companies, it can get kind of hairy. So just to kind of moderate the tone, moderate the transaction, and keep it above board, just let the guy or the gal flip out, behind the scenes while the lawyer takes the ball and negotiates negotiates the transaction, with some third party intermediary. Keep your emotions in check or completely out of it. Don't even get into this transaction. I think that's a really important part of this, because I'm sure you have seen some transactions blow up over pride, where it could have been a really good transaction for people, and they were like at the 1 yard line, and it just disintegrated.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, it's, I think, to your point, that third party is super valuable. An experience, this happens to me all the time, where, something to the effect will come out of my mouth. Hey, if this is okay, let's sleep on it. You and I are going to talk to tomorrow morning after and we're not responding. We're not sending an email. We're not responding in any fashion to this information that we just got. You and I are going to talk about it tomorrow and put together an objective, cooler head response, which I hope has saved many deals in my career, because that it's that initial emotional response, which is okay. We're humans, and you care, so you should have emotion. It's what you do with that emotion with a response, and the timing and the tone of that response, that's the problem.
Right.
So those third parties, whether it's lawyers or consultants or what have you, who can be that sounding board, that ability to lower the emotional charge that you're feeling, to help you manage through that, can be the difference between getting a deal done or not.
We do have people who listen and watch the podcast who are generating between $5 and $30 to $40 million, your range, for people that are looking to grow and acquire other customers. As we close out our discussion today, what would you suggest that is the next thing they do, like right now, tomorrow, other than contact you? And we'll get to how they contact you, in order to move themselves closer to acquiring that company down the street that they've thought about a million times every time they passed it, and realize that they should acquire this company because it would make a wonderful part of their company and it would be a great way for their business to grow. What's one thing tomorrow that can move the needle that they can do to kind of move the ball down the field?
Yeah, it's a great question. Something tangible that they could do. Let's say they have let's say they've had a thought of that competitor down the road. They may even have a relationship with them. They've maybe even talked about it at a high level that they should combine forces, whatever the case may be. Let's say you have a mental picture of ABC company, and maybe I would want to go acquire them. I think the first exercise I would do tomorrow is to bullet point what exactly would that company bring to my organization, very specifically. And then, and this is what most buyers, without advising, will miss. What things do you bring to them? What things are you bringing to them that you're selling them? What's your value prop to them? And you do those two things, and you come out of that exercise going, you're either going to feel super excited, and then maybe you have something, and it's time to go put together a plan, or you just go, whoa, I need to do more work on what I bring to this equation. Or after I thought about it, there's aspects of that business I actually, now that I've thought through it, wouldn't add any value. And so that's one thing, two things that you could tangibly do tomorrow, to map out if you have a target in mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it all starts with a written plan of some sort. Starting a business or going into acquisitions, it all comes down to like how you plan to actually make the leap and make it happen. So, Ryan, if there's someone who's listening to this podcast, which I know there is, who is in a position where they're thinking about growing in the manner that we spoke to today, how do they get in touch with you to get the process started where you come in and take a look at what they do?
Yeah, you can find my information on my website. It's gspiregroup.com. My email is on there, ryan@gspiregroup.com. Next step would be, we set up an initial preliminary kind of strategic call, just to, learn more about the business and what they're looking to accomplish. And that would just kickstart the next step and the next step and the next step that would, potentially lead to, me maybe helping them. But it all starts with a preliminary, first stage strategic call with me.
Awesome. And for all of you listening or watching this will Ryan's information will be in the description of the podcast or the YouTube video, and you'll be able to reach out to him there. Ryan, you were a wealth of a lot of valuable information. I tend to nerd out, and I could go another hour and a half on this subject because there's so much. I have so many more questions than we have time for. I'll have to have you come back on. I would love to have you come back on and us walk through a case study of maybe a major acquisition of companies that people actually know and are familiar with, and then we can apply it to small business just to kind of see how they were able to do it. Maybe we can do, once Twitter finalizes, would you be willing to come back on and talk Elon Musk and Twitter?
Man, that might be outside my my pay grade, but I'm happy to put some analysis on it. The
Yeah.
other thing, I'd love to be back. I do have a case study series that I have going on right now that's interviewing companies that are doing this work.
Uh-huh.
We can maybe go through one of those and
Yep.
see how that translates. Plenty of things to talk about. I enjoyed the time today and look forward to coming back on.
Me too. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon, and we will put together something, I think, for the audience in the future that will be valuable. All right, folks. So thank you for listening and or watching today. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Common Sense Show on YouTube. And for more information, make sure that you hit that notification bell so that you're notified when we do live events, when we have guests, when there's a new video that uploads, or if you're listening to this on a podcast, make sure that you click that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't joined our locals community yet, there's a link in the description for you to join our locals community. And by joining locals, you'll be able to get live access to a monthly Q&A with me. You can talk business. We can talk your business specifically. I can put you on the hot seat. We can talk about things that may be affecting your business, and I can give you some educational advice, not legal advice or anything like that you might be able to take into your business. So until next time, if you don't spend time building your business, you're going to end up spending your time building someone else's. Thank you for watching today.